Good morning and welcome to the Morning Spotlight podcast. I'm your host, Mike Ham, coming to you as always from the Spotlight Studios in Morristown, New Jersey. We got an episode on pilots today. Not pilots that fly planes, but payment in lieu of tax programs here in New Jersey. So we are going to meet our panel first, and then we're going to get started on the conversation. So first up, he is a repeat guest. So he was a guest on our LinkedIn video series, Steve Mlenak, partner at the law firm Greenbaum, Rowe. Steve, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Absolutely. Next up, she's a director at BJH Advisors, Maggie Haight. Maggie, welcome.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And last but not least, he is an executive vice president and general counsel at Woodmont Properties, Steve Santola. Steve, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I think for everybody listening, I always like to do this, establish some credibility first. So we're talking pilots today. We're going to go around the horn. Just give us like a quick understanding of your role and how it relates to pilots. So Steve Mlenak, we're going to start with you.
Yeah, you talked about it's going to be fun with the two Steves on here.
Yeah.
So thanks for that. So I'm an attorney. I do primarily redevelopment and development work all over the state of New Jersey. Our firm has been doing it for over 100 years now. And in the field of redevelopment, which in New Jersey is only growing and has over the last couple of decades due to, the constraints on development in New Jersey with the coastal wetlands, highlands, pinelands, and all those constraints, coupled with the fact that there's only so many farms that Steve Santola can buy up and build on. We have to talk about redevelopment. And when you talk about redevelopment, we talk about properties and areas that are typically difficult to pencil out a project without some sort of help. And that help can come in the form of favorable zoning, flexibility with other aspects with a particular township. But more often than not, it also deals with tax incentives. And that's where the legislature put into place the pilot program or the long-term tax exemption. So I deal with it on an everyday basis. Your other panelists on this do as well. And we could probably spend days and days talking about every aspect of it. So this will be a good overture for your listeners. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I really appreciate you coming on and doing this. Maggie, how about you?
All right, so BJH Advisors is a consulting firm located in New York City. We're a women and minority-owned business. We're pretty small and nimble, and we've been involved in New Jersey pilot projects for a fair number of years now. And so that usually means I get to take NJ Transit out to New Jersey and visit the project and learn more about what's going on in the municipality. We've looked at pilot projects from both the municipal side and the private sector side, so either working for the developer or working for the municipality that's interested in analyzing the project. And so we'll do financial analysis, we'll establish a but-for agreement, which I'm sure we will cover later on in this podcast, and really help the two sides understand each other and try to get the best out of the potential project.
Awesome. And Steve, wrap us up on this one.
So as a general counsel at the company, I'm in charge basically of all the approvals on the legal side. So I negotiate and document all of the pilots that the company is involved with. Yeah, they typically come with a financial agreement, it's called. And there are various forms depending on what municipality you're in, and those are heavily negotiated agreements that tend to go out 25 or 30 years. So they typically need to be all-encompassing because folks will be reviewing them and relying on them years after, hopefully, I'm retired.
All right, great.
And by the way, just to add one thing, we don't buy any farms as much as I appreciate Steve's commercial. We're not really Greenfield's developer. We've been around for 55 years at Woodmont Properties. We're mostly infill downtown. We also have an industrial division. So the farm thing really isn't for us.
Got it. Well, noted. All right. So I think it would also be good if we just, for the listeners and me, because I don't deal with pilots ever, really. So let's just define what a pilot is. So Maggie, you want to take that one?
Oh man,
you wrote it down, so I'm going to you.
I'm not the lawyer here. Can I pass that?
Yeah. Let's give it to Steve Mlenak. We'll start with Steve Mlenak.
Sure. So as I mentioned before, there are oftentimes in redevelopment, which is where this really comes into context, There are other areas in which you could get a pilot under the statute, something like 100% affordable projects, but primarily it comes in relation to a redevelopment project. A developer will typically make an application to the mayor, to the town, the municipality, and ask for a tax exemption under that law. And they will provide, their own financial analysis as to why they are justified in making that request. And Maggie used the phrase but for before. Typically, it's what we refer to as a but for analysis, that without the incentive of the pilot, the payment in lieu of taxes, the project wouldn't pencil out. You couldn't develop it and turn a profit on it. And therefore, without you, town, giving us the pilot, this property will continue to sit without the revitalization and the redevelopment that it needs, to help stabilize your tax base, get jobs in the area, get people mobilized in town. So in long and short, that's what it is in terms of the process. But what it actually does for the property owner and the developer is it exempts the value of the improvement to be made. And in lieu of paying taxes on that improvement, you pay a separate, what we call an annual service charge, which can be calculated a bunch of different ways, but typically it's a percentage on your annual gross revenue. So if you're building a residential building and you're putting up apartments for rent, it could be something like 10% of your annual gross rent in the year. And that's the payment that's made to the town. And the reason pilots work is because, sorry. That happened last time.
The last time Steve was on here, that exact situation happened. And it was like the funniest blooper I've ever had on any of these shows. So keep going. I'm sorry. That was perfect.
Great. The reason it works, the reason the pilot works is because it often ends up with a payment that the developer has to make that's less than what traditional taxes would be. Sometimes way less than what traditional taxes would be. On the municipal side, they receive great benefit as well. Obviously, the project gets built, and that's a benefit because you're bringing people into town, you're stabilizing your tax base, you're creating jobs, and you're removing a blight from that area because that's what redevelopment does. But financially, they're benefited because they get to keep 95% of that annual service charge. Under traditional taxation, they only get to keep a percentage of it. Most of it goes to the school district, some of it goes to the county, and they get a small percentage of it. So they may be collecting less, but they're keeping a lot more of it that they don't have to hand out, so to speak. So it really is a win-win program that has really helped create a lot of projects throughout the state that otherwise wouldn't have been built. Gotcha.
So we'll go with the other Steve on this one. How would a project qualify for within the pilot program?
Well, typically the way municipalities view it is the project has some sort of extraordinary cost component. Not always, but so that would be a large affordable component under the state regulations, an environmental remediation, perhaps extending and improving sewer and water lines in the downtown so that other property owners could benefit from that. So that in essence, due to one reason or another, the project is not feasible. Structured parking also becomes very expensive and can stop a project in its tracks. So when there are costs that no longer make the project feasible for investment, right? Because redevelopment's an investment. Companies, individuals, even publicly traded companies can put their cash in a lot of places. They can buy treasuries, they can buy stock, they can buy overseas equities. And so you want to get them to invest in real estate, and we want to get them to invest in real estate in New Jersey. And so when that real estate becomes unattractive because the costs are too significant due to whatever issue may drive those costs, the pilot is one way the municipality can sort of answer back and say, okay, yes, your environmental remediation of this site is very expensive, but we really want it remediated and returned to the tax rolls. So we'll introduce a pilot concept so we can lower your taxes or at least stabilize your taxes. I thought Steve's point was interesting. A lot of times the pilot isn't that much of a savings. It's some type of savings off of what your ad valorem taxes would be. But what's really attractive to lenders and commercial tenants is the predictability of it. Right now, there's no guessing. Municipality has a bad year. Taxes don't skyrocket. It's a very, very stable number. And what do investors love? They love stability and predictability. So it's a tool that municipalities can use because so many of the tools are in the state toolbox, right? This is one that the towns can control to help lower the costs to draw investment and draw redevelopment into that town.
Gotcha. Okay, great. So I want to talk about now that we've talked and figured out exactly what a pilot is and how a project qualifies, let's talk about like the benefits and the risks. So we'll do benefits first, because it's always good to get off on the right foot, right? So we talked about like how they work and all that kind of stuff. So Maggie, can you do this one? You want to jump in on this one to start? All right, let's do benefits first. We'll get benefits out of the way, and then we'll do risks.
Benefits.
Yeah.
When it comes to legal language, I leave that up to the professionals.
Oh, I agree, for sure.
I mean, so Steve really covered a lot of benefits there already, I think. The key one being certainty around property tax payments over a pretty significant timeline in some cases. And then also taking care of some of these extraordinary issues that might occur as part of the development. I think that this is one of the great features of a pilot, is that the two sides can really work together to identify some of these municipal needs, whether that be structured parking or other types of improvements that are happening in and around the development that a developer could take care of as part of the development process in an efficient way. And so I think that when you're able to wrap those things in with the development project, it can be really efficient and beneficial to both sides. And then let's see, potential for greater revenue depending on how the market is can be really helpful. So the annual service charge varies over time, depending on how the development's doing. If the developer is doing well and they're able to escalate their rents over time, that just means more money going to the municipality. So the municipality can share in that upside. It also allows the developer to lease up and pay according to how their development is doing. So it really doesn't burden them as much as traditional taxes in the early years of the development. Let's see, what else? I would say those are the main benefits that I can think of. There's transparency through annual audited financial statements, so both sides really know what's going on. And then overall, these redevelopment projects can help municipalities achieve some of their overarching planning goals for the area. So we've seen a lot of transit-oriented development in New Jersey, densifying downtowns, and to the extent that may be a new type of project for an area, these types of financial agreements can help get the development off the ground.
Great.
3 cheers to Maggie for that last one, because I was thinking to myself, I was on a panel recently with an urban mayor who was really struggling to get investment around his train station. It wasn't a town that had seen a lot of new residential development. And the panel was about, which we're going to get into shortly, I'm sure, some of the the legislation surrounding pilots and perhaps limiting how they could be employed. And the mayor said, well, I don't know too much about these various pieces of legislation you're talking about. All I know is before I talked about pilots, I couldn't get anybody to come in and invest and develop around my train station. And as soon as I started to talk about pilots, I had a line at my door. So the mayor can use that as a real carrot and stick to say, we're serious about development and investment. So come and talk to us. Absolutely. And once you start saying the word pilot, everybody's ears, because it's like that old E.F. Hutton commercial, right? When E.F. Hutton talks, people listen. When you say pilot, you will draw more attention than when you don't.
So,
and then I'll just add really quickly to pilot agreements aren't one size fits all. So, there's potential for a richer benefit to be scheduled on a project in an area that, maybe you've not had any projects like this, and you do need to incentivize developers to come in the door for you. But if it's a second or third similar type of development, pilots are really customizable in terms of their time length and their annual service charge rates. So, you don't have to be giving the same type of benefit to each subsequent developer. And I think there's a lot of room for a municipality to negotiate, which is good.
I think that's a great point, Maggie, because so like Maggie, we also represent both the private and public side. And I recently, on the public side, had conversations with the mayor, and this is a town that's never done a pilot before. And the conversation started with, well, this town next to us just did a pilot, and they did it at 10%, so we can't go unless we do 11% or higher, because we have to be better than that. And the conversation was, not all two pilots are the same, right? They're all different. They all have to be reviewed in their own capacity. The costs are different. The uses are different. The benefits are different. But for me, when we're talking about benefits, we talked about the financial aspects. That's the obvious one. Steve talked about predictability with financing. Obviously, that's huge. Maggie talked about planning. I think that's a key aspect. But for me, the beauty of redevelopment in New Jersey and really elsewhere and pilots is the flexibility that it affords. The statute gives you the framework, the minimums that you can settle for or negotiate in terms of the annual service charges. But outside of that, the flexibility is very broad and gives a lot of discretion to the parties to really see what makes sense. So on a town side, a lot of municipalities are able to leverage those agreements and to create projects that are greater and better for them and for the developer that otherwise under traditional zoning or whatever is there in the redevelopment plan already absent a pilot could not be accomplished. Things like the materials they use in a project, the look, the design. You may have a developer come in and under the redevelopment plan be able to put forth a project with no variances necessary, but they're going to do it at the cost that they're able to finance and the cost they're able to see a return on. Or, for example, they can have discussions with the municipality about how can we make this a better project? How can we make it worthy of where it's going in your town? Maybe increase the cost a little bit, but get that back on the back end with a pilot. So often when we represent municipalities, it's okay, what are your needs in town? Where's it located? Is this a TOD project? How is that going to interact? What do you want it to look like? Because there are costs associated with that. And often when you have that conversation about the needs of the public, it ultimately results in, okay, we can help you get that, but you're going to have to talk about a pilot to help make that happen.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So far, it sounds like pilots are awesome. But I'm sure there are some risks to pilots. This is how we set these things up. You see what I'm doing here? This is like a pro hosting a show. So Maggie, why don't we start with you because you did such a good job laying out the benefits to start. Let's do some risks on pilot programs.
Mike, you got the wrong panel. There's no risk.
That's the wrong panel. Well, look,
Maggie,
well, we're here. BJH is here to protect the municipal interest. I will definitely lay out some cons here.
Right.
So one of the things that both Steves have talked about is the pilot structure. And the way pilots are structured means that there is typically a lower payment that goes to the school district and the county than under normal ad valorem taxes. And so, this can be a real issue for certain municipalities. So it's important to analyze what's happening with each project. And then again, getting back to the flexibility argument, structure the agreement in a way that, covers those risks. So whether that's setting aside specific payments to school districts for the number of school-age children that may enter this development project, or setting up, separate agreements that work for the project. So I guess I would lay that out as one of the main issues that we usually talk about with our clients. How does the payment to the school and the county and maybe the library or whatever else is usually structured into ad valorem taxes. And then the other risk that I'll highlight, I don't think it's a downside, is just, a pilot at its heart is a public-private partnership. And so when you're a municipality, it's important to think about the developer that you're working with because, the two entities are going to be bound together for a pretty long period of time in some cases. And you're going to want to know what the counterparty risk is and, what that developer is, are they going to stay involved in the property over time? Are they going to build and sell? Not that that's a bad thing, but just fully understanding who you're getting in bed with, I think is important.
Definitely.
To Maggie's point about risk, and I think the Board of Ed is a great answer. But one thing that mitigates the risk is it's a percentage, right? So if we build a project and the town agrees to a 12% pilot, and we hit a grand slam and the rents are double what anybody ever thought they'd be, well, the town rides right along in the sidecar and picks up 12% and doubles their anticipated revenue. So it's not like you're agreeing to a number and the town could be made to look foolish. You know, I always talk about it as schmuck insurance, right? So you can't really make too bad a deal because we're partners. The first 12 cents of every dollar that we make goes right to the town. How can they really lose?
Right. Yeah, that was the point I was going to make. And, you know, if the attorneys, if Maggie or whatever financial analysts on both sides are doing their job, hopefully the risk is completely mitigated. But you do hear things like the school district, and I'm sure we can get into that. We can spend a whole podcast on that alone, that issue. You hear things like, well, is it corporate welfare? Do companies that have all this money who are coming in need this? You hear things such as Steve's point. What if they hit the home run? Or what are we doing? To Steve's point, you're partners. Entering into a financial agreement is entering into a partnership agreement, and you ride along with that. They hit a home run, you hit a home run, so your estimates get doubled as well. So as far as risks go, if everybody is doing their job and analyzing the project the way it should be, those risks are typically mitigated. And on top of that, if that doesn't work, the statute itself builds in some of those protections. It builds in a cap on profit. It builds in mandatory minimums, both at the beginning based on the year's prior tax revenue, as well as there's stages that kick in later on. So there are certain structures
And the audit.
to protect it.
And the audit.
And
The audit.
yeah, and every year the developer has to provide an audit, an independent audit.
All right, so maybe not risks per se, but like criticisms of pilot programs. That's
There
what
are
we're talking
those.
about more. Because I mean, I feel like in every situation, if you're dealing with the public, there will be criticisms, no matter what they are. You know, they may be as far fetched as you could possibly get, but they are there. So it's just a matter of working with them, right?
So
Right.
I find redevelopment is half legal and half public relations. And I'm sure, Steve, you find it the same, how many meetings we sit in to really educate the public on what this is, because the perception, the preconceived notion of this is that they're evil, or that they're going to, you know, every kid is going to be in a trailer with 40 kids to a school, to a teacher after this happens. And it's all about education, that this is not the reality, but the reality being that towns that have embraced the pilot program where appropriate have seen their towns revitalized, rejuvenated, and redeveloped to a far greater percentage than those who have not embraced it. And there are examples all over the state that you can give, and there are answers to those criticisms. Sometimes they are appropriate, and that's why you have people with the town like Maggie that analyze the applications that come in and say, well, you know, this really isn't a 10% project. Maybe it's a 12% project. Maybe it's a 15% project. Maybe it doesn't qualify at all. But that's why we have those protections in place from the public side.
Yeah, I guess I'll just name one more risk from the private side. A couple of our clients that we've worked with that are developers, you know, and this sort of gets into what types of projects make great pilots and which ones don't. You know, sometimes a town or a municipality isn't quite sure what they want. And even though they've designated an area for redevelopment and engage with the developer, I think it can be a super long, drawn out process in some cases. And meanwhile, the developer is, you know, dealing with all the carrying costs. Maybe they already own a site or some assemblages in this area that they're looking to develop. And so I guess that would be one word of caution or risk on the private side that can happen with these projects, is that they just take a really long time because you're working with a lot of different parties and, you know, trying to get buy-in from both the public and the municipality. And, you know, the reality is that just takes time. So I don't think from the private side that pilot projects are for everybody in some cases. So just wanted to flag that too.
Gotcha. All right. So we're going to kind of go off what Maggie was just talking about. So we're going to go to the Steves first, and we're going to look at like the types of projects that make good pilots. Or What are some examples of a successful pilot program that you guys have worked on? So we'll start with Steve Santola, and then we'll go Steve Mlenak, and then we'll keep looping it around. Because I'm sure once we start getting into some of these, I'm sure we're going to start talking quite a bit about different and how they worked and all that kind of stuff. So take it away.
I think the most successful pilots are pilots that are used, geared, and I loved Steve Mlenak's comment about being 50% PR, solving a problem, right? So we did a redevelopment in South Amboy on a really contaminated site that had been in the edge of their downtown for years, getting worse and worse. And we were able to negotiate a pilot with them, and we did literally millions of dollars of remediation, and brought that site back up to residential standards. So it was very easy for them to say, remember those 3 burned out buildings at the end of Broad Street that were disastrous? And, Woodmont came in, took all the soil out, cleaned up everything, and built this beautiful project for us. How could we go wrong? Another example would be where a structured parking facility is built that is not only for the new project, but also has some commuter parking and some background parking. So the other retailers, customers can also park in this new deck, and divvy up the revenue through the municipality or whatever. So that a town that previously had parking problems and now has a little easier to go downtown for dinner or Saturday afternoon, for shopping. So when you're solving a very visible, targeted, acknowledged public problem, in part through a pilot, and partnering with an experienced developer who can solve these problems, it becomes much easier to say, hey, this is what we're doing. And the other piece of the puzzle is, as we've talked about, the Board of Ed really doesn't get, under statute, doesn't get a chunk of the pilot. Most municipalities, some of it gets passed over anyway, either in the form of building new fields or writing them a check. So commercial projects that aren't residential in nature, a new office or new warehouse building or something, those pilots tend to be a little easier too, because you're not generating any school-age kids, so you're not adding to the educational budget. And so it's a little harder for the Board of Ed crowd to come out and say this isn't fair. So that's, although I would argue that more pilots are used for residential than for non-residential. So you certainly can and should use them in the right residential places. But when there isn't a residential component, it's that much easier.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
Yeah, the nature of the pilot structure, in that it can only be used in redevelopment areas, suggests that really where they're appropriate is those developments that you can't really do through traditional zoning, that it needs assistance. And that may be because the area is blighted, it has to be blighted under the statute. It has to meet the qualifications and the criteria of an area in need of redevelopment. But often the conversation comes because the town has had years where nobody's been interested in making, in redeveloping the property or making improvements to the property, and the reason for that is simply cost. On top of that, when you have to add, corrections or improvements to a town to correct their public issues, whether it be parking, as Steve noted, or other infrastructure improvements that need to be made, the statute allows for other tools, things like redevelopment area bonds that are made available and can be financed through the pilot program. Those make for good projects.
Right. Do you have an example of one that you've worked on?
We've done projects all over. We just did an extension of one for the FBI building in Newark. Basically every county, most of the redevelopment projects we're working on. A key takeaway is that this doesn't have to be big projects, right? For those of your listeners who are listening, thinking that this sounds good, but they don't really have anything big, it doesn't have to be big. We've done small. I'm in the middle of doing one for a church in Perth Amboy. Okay, these are doesn't have to be big projects. They're available regardless of size, so long as they qualify, so long as it's an improvement being made to property in a redevelopment area that could use the financial incentive. So I would say that, anywhere you see redevelopment happening, typically pilots have been able to be leveraged to make it happen.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point with the size doesn't matter. I think that was something that I didn't know until just now. So, Maggie, you got anything to add on this?
No, I think that these guys basically covered it. I was just going to ask you too, Steve, what's been your favorite project that you've worked on, or the weirdest one?
That's a good question. I need a co-host. You could be my co-host right now. So there you go.
And we'll turn to baseball after.
Yeah. All right. There you go.
Well, by the time this airs, the whole season will be over and the Yankees will have won.
They've better.
That comment could, age terribly.
Yeah. Well, because we were recording this when tonight's game 5 of the ALDS, and
I know I'm excited.
I've been sweating all day just because it's just like the whole series has been so nerve-wracking for me. But yeah,
well,
yeah, there you go.
This is like the 800th time you've played Tampa Bay too, so
I know.
It's what do you expect? What are your predictions for Game 5?
So,
predictions for Game 5? Yeah.
Oh no!
Oh, come on, Steve. Steve is holding up a Mets thing, so that really sucks. I mean, I think that Garrett Cole is going to come out and pitch really well. My only concern tonight is that the Yankees, for whatever reason, every now and then they just go into like these offensive funks, or they're going to do something weird with their lineup, like they're going to start Mike Ford or something like that, and they're not going to score any runs because, the Rays are going to roll out Tyler Glasnow and Blake Snell and all these relievers and,
Well, I can't wait to see what airs of this.
Me too. This is going to be in it. I mean, I'm not picky with what I put in there. But let's go back to Maggie's question, which was, can you say your question again? Because now I'm all off base. We're off the rails already. This is what happens as you get deeper and deeper into these episodes. So weirdest project or your favorite project?
Yeah, favorite project, most interesting project, or strangest project.
All right. Which Steve wants to take that first? Don't jump up all at once. Go for it.
I just mentioned my favorite project. I represent St. Demetrius Greek Orthodox Church in Perth Amboy, New Jersey. It's a church that's been there over 100 years and seen Perth Amboy at its highest, which I've learned over time in the early 1900s was one of the key, industrial and seaport areas of the state to where it is now. And they have, as a lot of churches do, some of the most prime real estate there is, right on the waterfront, beautiful, overlooking the Raritan. They had contamination problems years ago, which caused them to have most of their community center taken down, which had been there for years and had to be fully remediated. And now they have this beautiful piece of property and to rebuild a community center. But how do they do that? How do they finance it? And what else could they do to take advantage of these views? So working on that over the last 3 years with that group has been very rewarding because we've been able to leverage redevelopment. We've been able to make partnerships with the municipality there for this church. We've actually, and to our knowledge, we've searched this. We're about to create a housing project for their congregates. It's one of a kind in the state of New Jersey, where it's going to be community center and senior housing for their congregation. That comes with things like the Orthodox meal plan, that comes with a commercial kitchen for that purposes and various amenities, a chapel right on site. And we were able to do that pretty much only because of a pilot that we were able to come to terms with the municipality. So that's a great project that I'm very proud of.
That's awesome. Steve, you got anything for us? Favorite?
Every pilot's a good pilot, in my opinion. It's kind of like picking your favorite kid. New Jersey makes redevelopment and development difficult, right? High barrier to entry. It's not an easy place to develop, and people come from out of state and they're blown away. And it's not unique to New Jersey. Connecticut's difficult, New York, Pennsylvania. But if you go to Florida or Texas, you can just basically walk in and pull out a building permit and get started. So we do a couple of things right. One is the LSRP program, which is licensed site professionals to help get brownfields cleaned up. And that's through a private licensing group where you bring in a professional who's licensed by the state who can then run that process and not have to rely on DEP, which was terribly understaffed as hard as they tried. And so that has opened up worlds of getting sites remediated. And two is a pilot program. And both of those programs are really envied and copied by other states around the country. So when I say every pilot's a good pilot, I really mean that. I mean, some are hard-fought negotiations. Do I wish I had gotten a little bit of a better deal, 11% instead of 12% or 25 years instead of 20 years? Sure. But in all the pilots we've been involved with, they were all integral to not just building the project, but solving a problem locally. And when you can do that, it's a lot of fun because it takes the black hat off of the development process. It makes a resident who may have been skeptical from the start a believer that public-private partnerships, and I hate that expression, but public-private partnerships actually can work. People can be trusted with good agreements in place, and we're partners, and we can stand shoulder to shoulder and fix things and develop new things that are really people are proud of. And so to pick one, I mean, we were involved in probably 8 or 10 pilots around the state, and all of them, I think, were necessary to build the job, and they were necessary to solve a public ill or problem. And I think years after completion, there's been an acceptance of that. I don't have one pilot in place right now where I'm hearing pushback from the town saying, boy, we got screwed. What a bad deal. Or I wish we never did that. Or our residents are still furious over that. So I think, to Steve's point earlier, there becomes an acceptance and an appreciation that is very rewarding.
Awesome. Maggie, do you have any favorites that you've seen or no?
I mean, going off of Steve's point, I guess just maybe like favorite thing about the process, I totally agree. I think it's a chance for people to be collaborative and creative, and that to me is really fun as a real estate professional. And, I, as a consultant, have just really enjoyed getting to know the folks that are on councils and, the mayors of these various municipalities. Everybody has their own personality and really has the best interest of their area in mind. So that's been really fun to work with, and probably has been my favorite thing about working on pilots. So that's, very fluffy, but
it's okay.
All
right. Fluff's fine.
Say that.
Pilots can be the ultimate problem solver, right? You have two sides who are both trying to get something out of a project. One side is going to, keep adding. We want better design. We want these public ills, as Steve called them, to be solved. We want infrastructure to be improved. We need more parking. We want it to look a certain way, and that costs things. Meanwhile, the other side wants to be able to buy the property, build on it, and earn a revenue. And however those discussions go throughout the process, you have that sliding scale of the pilot that goes like this and ends up at that sweet spot where both sides ultimately should be able to get what they want.
Right. All right. So we are going to move this into our closing segment, which we call Under the Spotlight. So we did discuss this before we went on, so hopefully everybody's thought of something by now. Basically what we do is we're going to ask you for your final point that you want people to walk away from this episode with. It could be just a point about pilots, like an important thing that you think either we talked about it or we didn't talk about it and you want people to know this, or it could be a prediction about them. So Maggie, we're actually going to start with you. So I tried starting the first question with you. We couldn't do that, so now we're going to start with you on this one. So you're under the spotlight now. What do you got for us?
This is one I can do. I would say my final point for this segment is just encouraging both sides to keep an open mind as they're evaluating potential projects, because I think that's really been the theme of this podcast that's come through, that there are ways that this can be a win-win situation. And if people are open to listening to both sides and really working together to get to the best place, I think that there can be some really successful and innovative projects that really better the environment of these municipalities. So open mind.
Yeah, awesome. Steve Mlenak, you're up next.
Yeah, I'll say a couple of things, because what I had planned was what Steve Santola just said, which was going to be that I don't think I've ever come across a municipality or a developer who said, I regret that pilot. I think there's a lot of sometimes discussion that goes into them. There's a lot of public relations and education that needs to happen, and sometimes there's some disagreements at public meetings regarding whether they need to be granted pilots. But once all that takes place, it's rare that you have either side, either the public or private side, come out and say, we got screwed there, or we didn't make a good deal there, because the project was developed and we're money, and it stabilized our tax base. It fixed that problem that we had over there in town. It revitalized that area and brought it back to life. So that would be my number one takeaway. And the second one would be for your listeners who don't have much experience with pilots. If you have a property, or you're considering a property that just is not working, and you think it may be a solution to have redevelopment, to look more into this, because as I said, it could be the ultimate problem solver in the right town, the right area, the right property, to give it thought.
Awesome. Steve, let's put a bow on this thing, send it home. What do you got?
Well, this one's easy for me. I think that the listeners should be well aware that despite the fact that I said this was a great program that's been mirrored and investigated by states around the country, some people can't leave well enough alone. And so there are a number of bills that have been floating around Trenton for a few years that would alter pilots to the point of basically killing them, whether it's compelling certain percentages go to different groups, compelling, and no matter what the situation, prevailing wage, union labor, and those basically would gut the incentive for both the municipality and the developer to enter into those. Now, that doesn't say that, what we talked about, the Board of Ed getting certain perks, in each town's different. So each mayor and Board of Ed make their own deal. When it comes to union labor, some jobs are union, some jobs aren't. But again, by project, you make your own deal. By Trenton, in my opinion, trying to heavy hand some legislation compelling this takes the flexibility out of the process, and will, for all intents and purposes, some of these bills will kill pilots. Something that everyone acknowledges is driving redevelopment, helping municipalities and cities get financial footing under them and get projects going that they otherwise wouldn't be able to. Yet we want to keep messing with the system and changing the system. So if you're in the real estate world, be cognizant of this. Look for they're not always headlines in the Star Ledger because it's not terribly sexy, but make yourself aware and understand what a real disservice a significant change in the statute would mean to the ability to redevelop in New Jersey.
Great. Awesome. That was great. Great episode. I really like that one. So that's going to wrap up our show. So for everybody listening, if you want to touch base with any of these people, I will put their contact information in the show notes. So make sure you reach out to them if you do want to have a question or whatever it is that you want to ask them. I will also put the contact information for the Morning Spotlight. But if you want to be a guest or hear us talk about a specific topic on the show, email us at themorningspotlight@gmail.com or go to our website, themorningspotlight.com, and fill out the form, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Steve, Maggie, thanks so much for doing this. Obviously could not do it without you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And everybody else, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.